Thank you, Peter. Okay, so to start with, this is a presentation of being organized by the Faith-Based Affordable Housing, by the Partnership for Faith-Based Affordable Housing and Community Development, which is an alliance of four organizations, the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing, which is the group I'm the executive director for, the New York State Council of Churches, which Peter is the executive director for, the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative, which I am the president and Peter is the vice president, and Bricks and Mortals, which is the executive director is Kate Toth. So this is being organized by the partnership, which represents those four organizations. And the purpose today is to allow faith leaders to hear more about the City of Yes, which is as you'll hear, a very ambitious, creative proposal by New York City Planning, but also to express their concerns, to ask questions, to really let the city know. And let me say, John is the top, as I understand, the top person in the city on the City of Yes housing opportunity. So we're speaking to the man who knows it better than anyone. It's a very complicated proposal, but one proposal that, if successful and if does what it's supposed to, could make a real difference in the future of housing in the city. So the purpose is to really do a lot of listening on both sides. And let me say that we hope that what will come out of this conversation will be a better City of Yes and a faith community that is more engaged in making sure that the City of Yes includes our concerns rather than standing on the sidelines or speaking negatively about it, something that who knows when the opportunity will come again to make such a change in the city. That's the purpose. And we've heard, again, you'll hear from Bob and from Rashida and Peter as well, have been hearing some faith leaders are hesitant. And we want to give you a chance to speak up and let's hear what the concerns are and the city can give us our best response and then we'll go from there. So that's the purpose. So again, to introduce the participants, I'm Mark Greenberg, Peter Cook, Rashida Tyler, Robert Fultz-Morrison, and John Mangan will be the presenters today. And then we have a few more folks. Hey, Charles, welcome. Anyone who has not, and there's Janet back. So anyone who hasn't yet introduced yourselves, please, well, Janet, since you were here before, why don't you, if you're able, why don't you tell us who you are and what organization you're with? Is Janet here? Yeah, Janet, can you hear us? Yeah, there you are. You're unmuted now. Why don't you tell us who you're with? Janet's not able to. Okay. When you can, just raise your hand. And then Charles, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you're with?
Hi, my name is Charles Ryu. I'm a United Methodist pastor serving two congregations in Manhattan. One is English-speaking Korean American congregation known as Morningside UMC. The other one is First Spanish UMC in East Harlem. And I'm also a member of the executive committee of New York State Council of Churches as official representative of New York Annual Conference Methodist UMC. So glad to be here and to learn about this.
Thank you, Charles. So now I'm going to turn it over to John and Casey and tell us what we need to know about the City of Yes. You have 10 minutes on our
Okay, Mark, you got to turn the sharing on so that I can share my screen.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let me do that. Let's see.
Well, while we wait for that, I'll say my first job in housing was at a religious community for adults with developmental disabilities. I was a live-in assistant there, and in college, my senior thesis was on partnerships between the government and faith-based organizations to provide housing and other social services. So I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time. And I'm a current member of St. Mary's Church on Lower East Side. We have about 1,000 units of affordable housing on our campus. And it's a big thing that keeps the congregation vibrant. And so I really love doing this type of work, and it's great to see you all here today. Okay.
Thank you.
I am sharing my screen here, I believe. You see that?
Yep.
Great. So I'm going to present a special lens into City of Yes for housing opportunity, which is the things that we're specifically doing to enable faith-based organizations to use their properties in ways that strengthen their congregations and provide housing or other essential services for New Yorkers. We here at City Planning and the administration generally, as you know from the task force, are huge supporters of faith-based organizations and trying to do things like this in the years ahead. It's definitely a win-win situation for everybody involved. So why are we doing this? First off, well, we're in the midst of a generational housing crisis in New York City. The most recent housing vacancy vacancy survey that came out showed a 1.41 net rental vacancy rate, which is the lowest since the 1960s before the population declined. We see that everywhere, including, most prominently perhaps in our shelter system. We've had at any given night last year, we had over 90,000 people in the homeless shelter system, including over 30,000 children. And it's a real horrible situation that we obviously have to do something about. The proposals that we're going to share with you today, they emerge directly from our citywide fair housing reporting that HPD led but participated in with a range of agencies back in 2019, 2020, 2021. Where We Live did is identified obstacles to fair housing in New York City, showed how we got to where we are today, which is astoundingly diverse city that's also very segregated, and that really outlines the human consequences of the housing shortage. It's not this abstract thing. Everything from high rents, gentrification and displacement pressure, segregation, overcrowding, homelessness. All these things are driven fundamentally by the housing shortage. And I know I've talked to pastors in churches across the city, including one that sticks in my mind from Jamaica, Queens, who said, my congregation is disappearing because none of the younger folks can afford the housing here, and they have to move to Long Island, they have to move to Pennsylvania, they have to move to Atlanta, but his congregation has dwindled to about 40 people, and he says strictly because people can't afford to live there anymore. So it's something that I think many of you experience in a very real and direct way. So in order to address these situations, we absolutely need to figure out how to create more housing in the city. And our approach here is, for the first time ever, we want to take as broad a possible a view here and enable more housing in literally every neighborhood in the city, from the lowest density parts of the city to the highest density parts of the city. We firmly believe that everybody can contribute. Everybody should contribute. If everybody does contribute, then we can create a lot of housing. We can change the feel of the housing market without experiencing, dramatic neighborhood change in any one area. In your low density area, it'll remain a low density area. It'll feel the same to you. Medium density, high density. We can create a lot of housing. There are opportunities there to do that without, dramatic changes that people often fear. So for the faith-based organizations in particular, we're going to get into each of these prongs in a little more detail. But from the task force, we heard, just extend our conversion regulations citywide so that we can convert, churches own a lot of outbuildings, whether it's, I talked to, Malcolm Punter up in Harlem, their church owns some commercial buildings, to, I'm a Catholic, so lots of monasteries and convents and, maybe old schools that are vacant now, repurposing those properties for housing. But every congregation has different opportunities along that front. We want to make it easier for churches that have development rights and space on their campuses, on their lots for more housing, to do that. Today, zoning gets in the way. And so if you want to do something like St. Mary's has done on Grand Street, my church, you got to go to city planning and go through a full ULURP. It takes 2 years, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars in order for it to happen. We want to make it so that you don't have to do that. You don't have to do what Bishop Nelson had to do with Ebenezer and go through 2 years of ULURP and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to build housing. We want to create opportunities so that you can get going right away. Next, we want to increase residential capacity on faith-based faith-based sites in low density areas across the city. If your site's bigger than 5,000 feet, we want to provide additional residential opportunities no matter where in the city you are. We'll get into that a little bit as well. Next, for landmark churches out there, there's always one in every audience. We want to make it easier for those landmark churches to sell unused development rights to other sites in the neighborhood, earn some revenue that may help to, strengthen the congregation, take care of some issues with the physical plant, things like that. So let's dive a little bit deeper. First off, town center zoning. In lower density areas in commercial districts, you'll often see this, very iconic building form, non-residential ground floor with 2, 3, 4 stories of residential above. We basically made that illegal back in 1961. So you'll see these parts of the city that have these nice, commercial strips with housing above with like 1-story taxpayers, and you cannot redevelop that to create new housing, even if you wanted to today. You don't have the floor area, you don't have the height and setback, you don't have any place to put the parking. And so we've seen a lot of storefront churches actually in parts of New York City that have come in for rezonings to redevelop. You get a new church on the ground floor in the cellar, residential above. Wouldn't it be great if you did not have to go through a full rezoning in order to do that in low density commercial districts? You can see where in the city that applies through the red there. Next, this one I am always happy to present to faith-based organizations, transit-oriented development. So for everybody who's not faith-based organization or community facility, if you're within this transit-oriented geography outlined in black, and you have a large site, and you're on a wide street or the short end of a block, the zoning will enable modest multifamily housing, 3, 4, 5 stories. Great. However, if you're a site with community facility use and you're above 5,000 square feet, you can do this no matter where in the city you are, even if you're far from a subway, because community facilities like libraries, like churches on larger sites tend to define their own context. We will give you the ability to do, as of right, modest multifamily, no matter what zoning district you're in. You could be a single family district. It could be a 2-family district. It could be, a modest multifamily district. Today, it will give you a little more floor area, more flexibility to do a 3, 4, or 5-story apartment building there. The reason why we love this type of housing is that it's relatively inexpensive to build. It rents for less. It sells for less. It provides a housing type that families need in these areas that don't produce enough. Today, in low density areas, we basically only produce single family homes, mostly for wealthy people. We want to expand the types of housing that we can create in order to serve a broader range of families. Next, in medium and high density districts, which you see here in the orange. So in all medium and high density districts, we want to extend an affordability preference. Today, in most medium and high density districts, senior affordable housing gets a higher FAR. You can be a bigger building than other types of housing. Back when we were doing our fair housing reporting, where we live, we asked ourselves, what if we just extended that preference to all forms of affordable and supportive housing? Then, if you wanted to build a bigger building, you could, as long as in this instance, it's permanently affordable at 60% AMI. Now, this zoning program is intended to work with the state level tax benefit so that in order to support affordability, if you're 100% affordable, like we've seen a lot of faith-based organizations do, you could build bigger than you could before. Or if you're a mixed income development with some affordable and some market rate, you can build a little bit bigger than before, as long as any additional floor area is for permanently affordable housing at 60% AMI. Now, we've got an example of how this works. We've seen, I can't tell you how many of these projects like this we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years. 1-story church comes in, they want to redevelop with a new church on the ground floor and the cellar with residential above. Here you have a situation in an R6 district, which is a very common medium density district. Today, if you wanted to redevelop housing above this church, you could probably get about 35 units of housing. Great. Under UAP, you would be able to get 10 to 12 additional units as long as it was permanently affordable. So, if you're a church and you're partnering with Riseboro or some affordable housing developer to do affordability, great, you can do 10, 12 more units. If you want to make a deal with a developer, do a mixed income project and get some revenue for the church, great, you could do that too. You could build a bigger building. 10, 12 more units may not seem like much, but you multiply that by every development site across medium and high density districts, and you're talking serious housing. So you can see how incremental changes can lead to significant amounts of housing over time. Next, parking mandates. We propose to eliminate parking for all new residential uses. That provides additional flexibility whenever you're, developing additional housing, whether affordable or not, on your sites or in partnership on a site that you own somewhere. And another thing, specifically for faith-based organizations, is we are eliminating parking requirements for houses of worship. Period. So, that provides flexibility to some congregations across the city. We know some congregations need their parking lots because they have congregants who have moved to the suburbs and come back on Sunday. That's fine. You can keep your parking lot if you want to. For those who want additional opportunities on those sites, well, we would give it to you. We would eliminate any parking requirements that could free up parking lots today, accessory parking lots, for additional housing development or additional church space or community space or whatever it is that makes sense for your church to do on those sites. Next, conversions. I mentioned this, adaptive reuse. Today, we love our adaptive reuse regs. Today, it only applies in the darker purple here, so in more central locations. It only applies to buildings that are from 1961 or before. And you can only convert to full apartments, with full cooking and sanitary facilities. We want to take these regulations and strengthen them. We want to expand them citywide, first off. So anywhere in the city that allows residential, these will apply. We want to move the cutoff date from 1961 all the way up to 1990. So if your building's older than that, you can do it. And we want to enable conversion to the full range of housing types, including supportive housing, including rooming units that may lack full cooking or sanitary facilities, including dorms, things like that. We just want to provide more flexibility. And when you go outside of the dark purple, farther out into the city, you're really talking about community facility uses. You're really talking about, the monasteries, the convents, the old schools, the things like that. And this is something that the task force asked us directly for, and this is, something we're very happy to be responsive about. Here's another great one. So many churches, as you know, they have land, they have development rights, but the way zoning works today, it prevents you from doing infill development on those sites. The crazy thing is, if your church, for instance, is too tall, then you're not allowed to do modern, height-limited infill on that site. And it just cuts off a lot of opportunities that campus sites would otherwise have. So we are changing the way the zoning works to free up infill development on church-owned sites, without having to come to city planning for permission. And we would adjust distance between buildings regulations. We would end mixing rules that prevent that modern height limited infill on those sites. And we would enable a lot more opportunity for campus infill on faith-based organizations. Once I've talked to a lot of churches like farther out in Queens that have, plenty of land, but where the zoning doesn't provide opportunities today, especially in conjunction with some of the low density initiatives that I talked about a few slides ago. This will create significant opportunity even in the absence of rezonings.
John, I'm going to ask you to finish up because we'll have more chance later to talk with you, but see if you can finish up so we can get some responses from our.
Yeah, this is the last slide. Landmark TDR program. It was created in the 1960s to help landmarks. And I have to say it hasn't been used that much because the existing transfer radius is so tight and the procedure is so onerous. You have to go through a full ULURP, takes a couple years, a couple $100,000. We propose to expand the transfer radius to the entire block or across the street from that block and to reduce the amount of procedure required to a mere authorization, which can be done in less than a year. And doesn't require hundreds of thousands of dollars in consultant fees to get it done. I can say I talked to a landmark church in Crown Heights not too long ago that has no realistic opportunities today, but that will under this proposal in a way that could enable them to finally repair their roof and ensure the health of that physical plant into the future. So it's something that we're really excited to do. Let's see. I can stop sharing.
Thank you,
Stop.
John.
And
That
then
was-
we can any questions or comments?
Yeah, so what we're going to do now is we're going to ask Robert Fultz-Morrison and Rashida to share some experiences and some feedback that they've heard thus far in their interactions with other congregations about some concerns that have been raised. And then we'll get some responses from folks here to your presentation and to the issues that Bob and Rashida raised, and then we'll go back to responses from you. So do you want to start, Rashida, Bob? Who wants to start? Go first.
Rashida, go.
Rashida, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So in going around the city and speaking with faith leaders, and speaking about the city of Yes, a couple of concerns have come up, mainly in communities, Black and Brown communities, that are serving lower resource populations. So one of the questions or concerns that's come up is that as soon as the city of Yes passes, the developers that will be most in position to start developing under the city of Yes will most likely not be from the community or look like the people who are in the community. And so almost immediately, you're going to have individuals who are higher resourced and, more apt to build housing for people who cannot afford to live in that neighborhood come right in. So the initial wave of development will be for and by communities that can afford more, thus pushing out the populations that are more lower resourced and more of color. So the concern that has manifested itself is what can the city of Yes do to prevent that?
Thank you for that. So I want to back up first and say these proposals, they emerge directly from our fair housing plan. What you are describing, Rashida, is the status quo. That is what happens today. And so if you look at where we live, New York City, the multi-year process led by HPD that involved every relevant agency, these are the land use proposals that are intended to address that exact dynamic. And how does it do that? Under the status quo, you have neighborhoods that tend to be more advantaged, wealthier, more politically efficacious, tend to be whiter, that have been very good at getting what they want in terms of land use regulation from the political process. What's the result of that? You have places like the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, parts of Lower Manhattan like Greenwich Village that are literally losing housing. They are shrinking through things like unit combinations because they've been so good at preventing any new development there that they are actually shrinking. What does that do to a city whose population is growing, to a city that's creating jobs? It pushes people who are looking for housing farther and farther and farther out. And so the story of parts of the city that are under extreme gentrification and displacement pressure, I think first of places like Central Brooklyn or Manhattan north of Central Park, that is entirely a function of the exclusion that happens in more central, wealthier, better resourced, more politically efficacious areas. And so the absolute best way, or the only way, to take displacement and gentrification pressures off of lower income, more non-white communities in the city is to ensure that we are enabling housing production across the city, including in the most central, highest demand locations that have been really good at shutting it down. And so if you look at where we live, New York City, the Fair Housing Plan, we lay all this out. This is our lodestar for housing policy. And so I can go to, communities in central Brooklyn. I can go to communities in northern Manhattan, other parts of the city that are experiencing these pressures, and, very honestly say, these proposals are for you. These proposals are intended to address the status quo that overburdens your areas, whether it's because through a ton of development. I was in Bronx CB1 last night. They had the most housing completions of any community district in New York City last year. The most. That's upside down. It's obvious it's not it's not the community district experiencing the highest demand. It's not the most central community district in the city. It's not the, highest opportunity community district. But it happens to be a place that, unlike places like Upper East, Upper West, Lower Manhattan, you can still develop stuff. And so it happened to have the most completions last year. In terms of who's doing the developing, we spend a lot of time talking about housing and what more housing means for the housing market. It creates additional housing opportunities for instance, tenants who have no housing opportunities today. Landlords know that. Landlords hold all the power. When landlords hold all the power, they can raise rents. They can be unresponsive. They can rent out low quality housing, things like that. We spend less time talking about the land market. Today, the land market is also constrained. It's not just the housing market, it's also the land market. And so when the land market is constrained like it is, who's going to get that site out in Bed-Stuy, which has become a lucrative place to develop? Who's going to get that site in Washington Heights, which has also become a lucrative place to develop? It's going to be the deep-pocketed big guys. And so we've seen deep-pocketed big guy developers going farther and farther out in the city as the housing crisis has gotten worse. If this plan gets enacted, if this plan succeeds, we'll not only create more housing, but we create also more opportunities for development on faith-based, sites, for instance, as well, or non-faith-based sites too. Just a lot more potential development sites. When that happens, we fully expect the big guys to go to the highest value parts of the city, where there's the most money to be made from, doing condos or whatever. And that will actually create opportunities in the places like Bed-Stuy or in the places like Washington Heights for the nonprofit developers, for the smaller guys, for things like that. So by expanding the housing market, you create opportunities for immigrant developers, mom and pops, MBE developers, folks like that as well. So it kind of parallels the changes that we're trying to effect in the housing market. It happens in the land market. So if people say, come to me and they're like, I like CLTs. Like, what does this do for CLTs? It creates a lot more opportunity for housing development in a way that will free up opportunities across the range. Yes, for some of the deep-pocketed big guy developers in the higher value parts of the city, let them go to the Upper East Side, let them go to the Upper West Side. But that frees up opportunities for nonprofits, MBE, immigrant developers in, the neighborhoods like Central Brooklyn and Northern Manhattan.
Great,
So,
John, thank you very much. So,
I'm going to actually follow that up because I think that we did speak about this before, because developers will flow where they can develop. And so if there's a higher resource community on the Upper East Side or a wealthier community, there's more likely going to be a legal challenge, even if it's unsuccessful. Even the delay tactic of using a legal challenge can help that community not have the development there. Whereas if they go to a lower resource community where they're not able to mount a legal challenge, you're more likely going to have the development occur there. And so is there anything in the city of Yes that helps these communities, particularly Black and brown communities, even the playing field? Because a developer is going to develop no matter where it is. And so communities that were once considered lower resourced or not a desirable area for development are becoming more desirable. And so what can we do, and what is in the city of Yes to help combat that?
Right. So, I mean, that's among the benefits of a citywide approach. If we are doing one big zoning action that enables a little more housing in every part of the city, that's one action. Will we get sued? Probably. We'll win that lawsuit. And then there are no more opportunities for the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side to challenge if and when, folks are developing there. So that's just one of the additional benefits of a citywide.
Great.
And I want to say we've also seen other jurisdictions have attempted like a little bit more everywhere like this, and we see what we expect to see, which is if given the opportunity, the big players will flow towards the higher value areas, freeing up neighborhoods like such that you're talking about for folks who are more from the community to do types of developments that fits better there. So more housing is the only thing fundamentally that will be able to take pressure off of the housing markets in some of the neighborhoods that you're talking about. In the absence of that, the gentrification and displacement pressures will remain intense.
Great. Thank you, Rashida, and thanks, John, for your responses. And I know Bob wanted to go next. So Bob, go ahead.
John, I wanted to give an opportunity for the faith leaders here, perhaps to list the kinds of questions and concerns they might have. So if you could jot those down and then come back to it, because that's planned our schedule. Because I'm here as a faith leader and also for the faith leaders. When I went to the community board hearing on the housing in the Bronx, I was the only faith leader that spoke. There are only 9 of us actually that made any comments on the housing to the community board hearing. 2 of us spoke in favor, and 7 either not or had too many questions. What the community board chose to do next was to bring in a supposed consultant who then bragged about having gone through the 1,000 pages or more of documents and just basically tried to whittle down on super technical points why the city of Yes is not going to work. And what I want to just put before you, John, and the faith leaders is we don't always have the sophistication of having read the 1,000 pages of documents and all that. But what was more disturbing was that there had been backroom discussions where the outcome was pretty predetermined from the beginning, from the 2 white male speakers who spoke for nearly 2 hours in the second hearing, only to say constantly, if you disagree with me, speak, and then they would go on to speak. So the need for dialogue with the faith community, need for dialogue with people in our communities is really important, because most of the conversation was somewhat a fearful tactic of what was going to happen to 1- and 2-family homes and the threat of infilling all over the city. And I didn't hear a whole lot discussed, as Rashida has said, about Black and brown communities, low-wage workers who need affordable apartments, and also those who don't have homes who need supportive housing. That seemed to be not before our particular community board, but remains a great need, because 10,000 affordable units were taken off the market just last year. So we're in a decline situation. So those were some of the things that I tried to speak to, but I also want to say to the faith community that one of the things that does keep coming up is with these proposals of the average or the area medium income, is it truly affordable? When people say we're going to build an AMI affordable place, or is only 20% of a building instead of 100% really going to meet the need for affordability? And can we ensure that displacement or gentrification is not going to take place? Can large developers include minority and women-owned developers? I mean, how do we as faith communities also encourage that within our communities? And how much flexibility? The people who spoke at our community board were adamant that this whole thing was mandated and there was no flexibility in it. I disagreed, but again, trying to be super technical, they were certainly overwhelming some of the listeners. And then also what may be important to all of us who are faith leaders remaining in our communities for many decades, what durability can we see beyond just one mayor, one political system, one city council, that this is going to continue beyond just a vote, even if they all affirmed it. So those are some questions, but John, I'd like to ask the people who are faith leaders, if they would like to share with Rashida and me what you're hearing, and maybe by way of asking first, would either use a reaction or use your hand if you're showing your face. How many of you have not heard of the City of Yes? How many of you have not heard the kind of presentation that John has made? Would you somehow indicate that if you've not heard of the City of Yes? Good, I'm not seeing any reactions, John, so that's a good thing. But what I'd like to ask any of you who would like to speak, to just unmute yourself. Mark, you can monitor this part. And what questions do you have about the City of Yes that you're interested in or concerned about? We'd like to hear from you now, and then ask John after hearing from all of you to respond. Would you please go ahead?
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you. My
go
name
ahead.
is James LeBon, and we are proposing a development of affordable housing, and the community is pushing back and saying that we are bringing in homeless shelters because the affordable housing that's being proposed will become homeless shelters. You know, as vagrants and other people come to live there, and that would be a general decline in the community. How do we handle that type of objection?
Thank you, Denzel. Let's note that. If you also want to raise your hand, it pushes you right up to the screen where we can see it. So Jeffrey Quarter, would you respond, followed by Charles Rue?
Sure. I just wanted to say this affects me where I live. My son is living in New Jersey because it's $1,000 a month less to live there. And so, you know, his wife is pregnant. We're looking at trying to get them to move back so we can take care of our grandparents, but they can't afford it. But you mentioned adaptive reuse, and it seems to me there's a lot more vacant or nearly vacant office complexes. That's going to go a whole lot faster than tearing down churches and building in places where, frankly, when I talked to this issue about housing in my congregation, they didn't want to see their beloved sanctuary torn down. And we don't have a lot of options given where we're at. We're in a very high density area in Queens. Parkview Hospital has just been bought by the Jewish Community Center, I think, and they're looking to turn that into affordable senior housing. But the other issue that we have is a lot of developers come to churches saying, and this was the Jewish Reform Temple next door to us. They sold it to a developer who now, because of the 421 tax credits, walked away from the deal. But to involve a sale requires the Attorney General to approve the sale. We've been trying to sell a house. It's been almost a year. The court system and all this, I mean, it's just unbelievable. Last, city grants. You know, if the city really wants this to happen, financing is something that I think they need to kick some money in. So those are some comments I have. And if anybody wants to follow up, I'd be happy to give our confidential information. I'm also on a committee of the Presbytery. We've got close to 90 churches across the city of New York. We're going to see some of them close because congregations are going to get to this point where they can't afford to keep their property. And so we're going to have this asset. And if the Attorney General issues are still there in place, it's going to be a long time before we see any kind of housing created. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Charles Rue, you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you very much. Once again, John, thank you for the comprehensive presentation. I guess my concern in many ways, you know, is in tandem with what Rashida and Rob raised as well. The idea that once we open up more areas to develop much more easily, the super developers will all go to high end and it'll give us a chance. Is way, way too naive. Not only naive, that has been the kind of, I don't know what the right term is that is neutral in terms of my emotion. That has been the frame that have been used time and time and time again. And only one who won was with the high money and high political connection. In other words, I mean, if you are investor, there are a lot of stocks that are going down, and they always go to good ones. But if you have a lot of capital, you buy all those things when it's down, and then you rip it up later on. You could even manipulate the markets, and that's what development have been doing in the New York City. That's why we have such a high rent, artificially raised high rent compared to other cities. So unless there is a specific built-in safety measure to control, and when you open this thing, we give preference to smaller developers connected to Black, brown, communities, more low-income communities. And part of the development actually is part and parcel of the regional communal community development. It's not going to work. I know big money people will buy up all the possibilities. Another one is this. I don't understand what we mean by affordable housing. I've been signing up for, the city's affordable housing thing that you get lotteries. I look at the apartment. The range of income is way, way beyond me. I've been a pastor for 40 years, and with my retirement cost or whatever it may be, there's no way I could be part of that retirement, that affordability. So how do we define affordability, especially when our average income, the median income is $37,000 in the entire United States? We say average income is about $75,000 a year. But if you take 10 top earners, it becomes about 45. If you take about 1,000 biggest earners, then it becomes about $35,000 a year. That's our average income. So where is affordability? So people say the reason why New York City's affordability is so high is because when you calculate that, we include Westchester County as a region to come up with the average. Can we do affordability in a smaller unit? What's affordability in Washington Heights? What's affordability in East Harlem? Unless we have that kind of affordability calculation, this current affordability makes sure that only those with means go in.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Before I get to Peter Cook, let me ask, are there other faith leaders that have come on that would like to raise a question with John or with us? Is there anyone else I'm missing? We have about 7 more minutes.
Peter hasn't raised.
Then Peter, please go.
Yeah, I have a question based on what I've heard so far. So just because you're a well-resourced developer does not mean that you aren't going to do the right thing when you get into a community. And just because you're a minority business or developer doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do the right thing to serve that community. And so the question really is, what are the rules that the city has that will attract any kind of investment to do the right thing? Because no matter who invests there, regardless of their race, they have to follow a certain set of rules. And And so if there's an imbalance in the rules that makes it hard to build housing that serves the community in which it dwells, or makes it such that churches are vulnerable to developers who take advantage of them, then we need to look at the rules. But I
Yeah.
think, anyway.
Thank you, Peter. Is there
You're
Sorry,
muted.
Robert, you muted,
Just got
unfortunately.
muted.
Sorry about that. Is there anyone else that'd like to raise a question, comment, concern? We have just a couple more minutes, and then we're going to ask John to come back to us. You all are quiet today.
If I might,
Yeah, sure.
this is not a very technical question, but maybe that's part of the question itself. Pietro again.
Okay.
John, I found your presentation enormously helpful, and especially because it was so technical. But I guess the question is more of a thought than anything else. But my sense is that especially smaller congregations, smaller communities can often be simply just emotionally, you can say, even put off by the technicality and the difficulties involved with considering a development of any sort of any level, basically. And I know that there are plenty of organizations and nonprofits and so on that do the job basically of serving as middlemen who can kind of help facilitate the relationship between a small congregation and a developer. But I'm curious what I don't know what is being done to smooth that communication out even more, whether those middlemen aren't needed, whether there's just more informational material that can be put out there that helps give people just a general baseline understanding of how zoning is functioning and what's working and what the proposal is and what the current status quo is as well. But again, it's a half-baked thought about it. In fact, exactly this point, that the communication itself is super technical sometimes, and I can imagine that is off-putting.
Thank you, Pietro. We have room for one more comment, if anyone has one. Then we'll turn it over to John. Hearing none, Mark, I turn it back to you to turn to John.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks everyone for your comments, and John for your listening. So now, why don't you try to respond to those that people mentioned? I thought they were all very valid points.
No, those are fantastic points. I think that Reverend Fultz Morrison opening with his story of what happened in Riverdale, Bronx CB8, is an absolutely perfect example, the best example of the politics that we are up against when we're trying to advance our fair housing goals. And the reason why I am where I am is because I think it's a position where I can do the most good about these issues that we care about. Like my background again was working with creating limited equity co-ops, working on fair housing litigation, affordable housing development. I'm here because I care about the issues that you were just talking about. And we are hoping to engage in a citywide approach here to solve some of the political impossibilities that you rub up against if we were to try to go, say, and do something specifically in Riverdale. If we were trying to do something specifically in Riverdale and we went to, Community Board 8 and dealt with what Reverend Fultz Morrison had to deal with there, and a council member who's obviously going to be very receptive to what the people who vote for him or against him think about a given proposal, there's just no chance that we would be able to accomplish anything there. If, however, we take a citywide approach and say we're all in this together, then maybe, just maybe, there's a way to put together the political coalition. There's a way to draw people's attention to the big picture what is happening in the city and what we're doing to this city, as opposed to narrowly focusing on, you know, what's happening in the 1 block radius around my house. And so that's why we're trying to take our approach in our fair housing plan like we are. I recognize that some of the most pronounced concerns around the city are around displacement pressures. And I understand also why people see new buildings going up and they think that that is what's causing the displacement. But we're also trying to underscore the fact that displacement is everywhere and always a result of not enough housing.
Mhm.
That's what drives it. If you're in a city that has roughly enough housing, that has a healthy vacancy rate, you don't see that type of displacement pressure. Tenants have options. Neighborhoods don't transform in the period of 5 or 10 years through waves of gentrification like we've seen in New York City. It's just a much stabler, healthier housing market. Under the status quo, where we don't have enough housing, it creates that full range of problems that we were talking about. The high rents that Jeff's son is facing that make it impossible for him to live here. The gentrification pressures that see rapid neighborhood change, the exploding shelter population here as well. Those are all fundamentally driven by housing shortage. And yes, we need first and foremost affordable housing, subsidized housing, but we also really need housing of all types. Like market rate housing is important too. I think of it this way: the people who cause distortions in the housing market, the people who cause trouble, in some lower income neighborhoods are the people who have money to spend on housing. The people who have money to spend on housing are the folks who can, pay more than a mother and 2 kids in Crown Heights for a 2-bedroom apartment. We need to house those people too. We need to give those folks housing as well, the people with money, in order to take the pressure off of the neighborhoods that are, I think, of most concern to us here. So I also want to underscore that affordable housing is extremely important, but we also need privately financed housing of all types that government doesn't have to pay for, and that we don't have to oversee. Agree completely with Jeff that office buildings are a tremendous opportunity, and those are the focus of our adaptive reuse and conversion conversations. There's a lot of vacant office buildings in the pipeline now. I just, was not emphasizing that as much for this office, but that's at the core. I know Linda Heinberg over at the AG's office. I know that she's very diligent when it comes to looking at transactions that involve nonprofits. That's a little bit beyond our ken, but I've worked, with her and others in that office, and we absolutely should see what we can do to streamline those procedures while also making sure that, nonprofits and their members are protected. I presented to the New York Presbytery not too long ago too. I don't know if some of you were there as well, but we did look at a broad range of churches across the city. I want to say that I put my email address in the chat. Everybody take it, because every time I have a meeting like this, I make 5 or more connections with new faith-based organizations who just want me to take a quick look at their site.
Mhm.
I'm not the person who's going to hold your hand through that process. As you noted, there are, New York State Council on Churches is a great first step, or Enterprise or LISC or Bricks and Mortals or other organizations that can walk folks through, that process. But I'm always happy to just take a quick look at your site, say what's possible today, what's possible under these proposals, just to kind of, get you thinking about it. To Reverend Ryu, what you're describing, the luxury development and only luxury development in certain parts of the neighborhood, that's another consequence of the housing shortage. So if it's really, 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 really hard to get hold of land and develop something on it, and if rents and housing costs are really high, then anything that gets built is going to aim as high as it can in the market. That's where the margins are. Because there are housing shortages up and down the line, because housing costs are, as a result, really high. When new development happens, it can, it can be ultra luxury. Again, looking at places, parts of the country where development happens can happen a little more freely, a little more naturally. It's once you satisfy the upper end of the market, you start to see more modest housing being built. So it's just the fact of the luxury housing in parts of Manhattan that I think you're talking about. That's another function of the fact that we can't build enough to keep up with demand, and therefore people aren't going to build for the middle of the market unless there are rules in place. And that's why I think Reverend Peter Cook mentioned, what rules do we have in place? The biggest initiative that I described for City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is that universal affordability preference. We are keeping market rate floor area where it is today. You're capped wherever you are today. We are floating FAR's floor area for affordable and supportive housing only. So if you want to do anything more than you can do today, it has to be permanently affordable housing. How do you define that? We're driving affordability levels down. I think a lot of the affordable housing that you guys were concerned about, that's at 130% AMI, which is nuts. That is so high. It's not affordable. It is off the charts. It's, it's definitely higher than most people can even afford in New York City. That's why universal affordability preference requires 60% AMI, an average of, it allows income averaging. So these the new zoning would create units at a range of incomes for a range of families from 30 to 90% AMI, I would say is likely. 30% AMI, that's $1,000 for a new 2-bedroom, which is not too bad for housing that does not require subsidy from HPD. 60% is $2,000 for a new 2-bedroom for a family of 3. That's better than any affordable housing that we've created through the zoning before, and so we're extremely proud of that. Because UAP would expand that inclusionary framework throughout all medium and high density districts, we expect to create tens of thousands of new income restricted units over the next 10 to 15 years. That's more than all zoning programs for affordable housing have created since their inception in the 1980s. So it's just massive. And again, it shows the power of geography. If we're really going citywide, then we can create a lot of housing and a lot of affordable housing through relatively minor changes to the zoning. I take sort of Pietro's and Pastor Vaughn's question kind of similarly, where the politics can be really hard, internal to the congregation, outside the congregation. We hope, when we're talking to faith-based organizations, that you are the types of organizations that can build that trust, both within the congregation and with the neighborhood as a whole, in order to do things that other types of entities like, your deep-pocketed developers would not have, the trust to do. And I'll say that City of Yes, back to Reverend Fultz Morrison's, the politics are very difficult. But one of the groups, one of the constituencies that almost any city council member really wants to help are the faith-based organizations, because they recognize the role that you play in the communities. So, I'm hopeful that the trust that you engender in your communities and the, obviously good intentions you have, not only for your own congregations, but for the communities that they're situated in, can provide the ability to use some of these changes that we're hoping to make to the zoning, to do things that can, again, strengthen your congregations and provide housing and other essential services to all New Yorkers. I'm not sure if I hit all the points that you guys made there, but I'll stop there and see if anyone has any additional questions or concerns. Just finally, I recognize that all of this depends entirely on trust, and so I'm trying to build that trust with communities in the way that many of you have built in your communities over time, that I'm not a developer shill, that I'm not somebody who's just taking marching orders from, a mayor who may not have, the intentions of the city planning agency or whatever. I'm not that I'm saying this, but I really believe in these plans, really believe in these proposals, that they can, really move the needle on some of the fair housing concerns that we all share. And so that's why I'm, really happy to go out through anywhere in the neighborhood, whether it's hostile, whether it's friendly, to discuss these and figure out ways to move them forward.
John, I want to thank you so much. I think you've responded to most of the concerns I think that I heard addressed. I see Peter's got his hand up. I'm not sure if Charles is raising his hand or just contemplating, but I did want to say something and then call on Peter. One, I just wanted to make the point, and this was very clear, and I hadn't really focused on this before, but you're saying that the average apartment that would be produced through the city of Yes would provide for $2,000 cost for a family of 3. That's the average, which means somewhere above and somewhere below. That's pretty astounding because that is not easy. That's almost impossible to find. When a family of 3 finds a $2,000 a month apartment, they're very fortunate. So I think that's a terrific target. The other thing I wanted to mention, and then go to Peter and then Rashida, welcome back, Rashida. In terms of political concerns, certainly council members, as Bob said, can be very hesitant to go against what the community board seems to want. But borough presidents may have a little more latitude. And I know in the Bronx, when a proposal came up in the, that cost the council member her job, the borough president did approve it, did support it, and it is moving forward. So I think possibly borough presidents can play another mediating role that council members may be concerned about taking a positive position on. So those are my 2 points. And Peter,
two quick things,
Yeah,
two
go ahead.
quick things, Mark, that I forgot to respond to.
Yeah.
Reverend Foltz Morrison asked about. So these are changes to the zoning which are permanent. They don't depend on who's the mayor, who's city council. They're changes to the zoning that are permanent and would provide opportunities into the future until you go through another process and change the zoning. Do we have flexibility? Of course. Something of this size and scope is going to be subject to a ton of negotiations based on things we've heard at the community board level, based on things we'll hear at the council level. And so it is a negotiation process that enables us to address some of the concerns that are raised during public review.
Great, thanks, John.
And then
So Peter,
the borough presidents have been great. I was with the Bronx BP, Vanessa Gibson. I was with Antonio Reynoso from Brooklyn the same day. They spoke broadly in support. I was with BP Mark Levine yesterday, also extremely supportive. So it's great to graduate kind of from the community board level, where sometimes you get a Bronx CB8 situation, to elected officials with a somewhat broader view.
right, absolutely, and I think they're all good. You got some five good borough presidents. I think are predisposed to having this thing move forward. So that's very exciting. Peter, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to just pose an example here for a faith-based property, just to kind of get a sense of how this City of Yes would work. So let's say we have a congregation that has the capacity to build 50 units on their property. Now, they could do several things. One is they could just sell the property to a market rate person, take the money and do whatever. Or they could work with a developer to build 50 affordable units and with that developer. And in order for them to build trust with the community, which is that they need to be able to show the community that the developer they're partnering with is not exploiting them. Because there's a lot of churches who are not trustworthy because they don't know how to stand up for themselves with a developer. So they either don't do anything or they get in bed with a developer who takes advantage of them. What would City of Yes do to incentivize that church to build affordable housing and make sure that they're not taken advantage of by a developer to build that housing?
I do not think that zoning is a place where we can provide protections to congregations in the situation that you're describing. I think that's more working with the burgeoning community, like support community for congregations that want to develop, like Bricks and Mortals, Enterprise, LISC, like the task force, like New York State Council on Churches. We just want to make sure that folks are aware of those opportunities and utilize them. And of course, that's, the intent of the role behind the AG's office as well, to make sure that that congregations aren't up to no good, with some of these they're not doing like self-dealing transactions. Also that they're not getting taken advantage of by, unscrupulous developers. But I'm not sure that there's anything that the zoning, that pure land use regulation can do in order to protect you on the transaction end. There's a fairly, bright line between land use regulation, how big your building can be, what uses you can have there, in the transactional side once the money starts flowing. But I consider that to be why I'm collaborating with groups like this, like Kate from Bricks and Mortals, Enterprise, LISC, and why I have a close relationship with Linda at AG's office as well.
Right. So just one point of clarification. The three groups that do pre-development you describe are the partnership, which is and LISC and Enterprise. Those are the groups that walk people through the pre-development work, to advise congregations. But zoning could matter in this case, because when a church goes and talks to a developer, if they are able to say to the developer, well, you can't really, because of the zoning, build market rate housing on our property. You have to build affordable housing. And if a congregation doesn't have that rule in place for the city, then they are going to go to the least common denominator, which is market rate. In fact, the Attorney General almost would encourage that because they need to get the full value out of their property. So the zoning matters a lot in terms of in terms of putting the right deal together.
Right. And that's why we're kind of pushing the envelope on the zoning, where we can demand like a percentage of affordable housing.
Right.
In all medium and high density districts under these proposals, for the first time ever, you would have to, if you want to max out your lot, if you want to build as big as you can build, you'd have to provide a certain amount of affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI, permanently affordable, which is great. Zoning would not be able to legally require 100% affordable on a site. If zoning were requiring 100% affordability on a site, that would be forcing landowners into to go to the government for subsidy in order to build anything there.
Right.
Which would be like a taking. So we're pushing the envelope on affordability, but we would not be able to mandate that faith-based organizations only develop 100% affordable.
Right. Well, I didn't say 100% affordable. What I said was that if it has it has to have an affordable component to it.
Yeah, that we can do. And that's what the first time ever, that's our proposal, to do that across all, medium and high density districts.
It wouldn't prevent the congregation, from building 100% affordable, but it would prevent the congregation from just, if they want to stay within the zoning, just building market rate.
Mhm.
Yep. Very good. So I'm going to go back to our agenda to see that we're on track, and I think we are. We said that we would have this conversation until 2:10, and it's now 2:17,
Nope.
and that we'd go to next steps. So,
Well, Charles has his hand up, Mark. Is there still
sorry,
time to
thank you. Who does?
Charles?
Charles,
Reverend Yu.
I had it, yeah. I
I
guess
didn't
one
notice the hand.
question,
Sorry, go ahead,
yeah,
Charles.
one question to John is, why is that affordable housing development requirement only in medium and high density? Why not through all? Because without that, again, what all the concerns that we have here don't seem to be reflected, and there's a little no guarantee. I love the way Peter raised the question. Another question is, I do agree that when we develop, it's not only for the poor, it has to be for all ages. For me, the public housing, or the affordable housing development model is City of Vienna in Austria, right? As probably you all know, where 60+% of population live on public housing, but the public housing there is not what we think of a public housing. So I hope that as we change zoning and also do affordable housing work, that some other example can be utilized. Again, for the combination of actual building more units and changing the office, which is going to be more and more vacant given our changing technology and the lifestyle changes, will be more available. So that unless they are combined together, I mean, you are saying, okay, we have to be on this one, and other concerns are addressing other kind of effort. If that is the case, unless there is this support network for faith-based communities to be ready when this zoning change and therefore development market radically changes, unless that happens simultaneously, by the time small budgeted faith-based organizations try to do it, it probably is too late given our market force as we have witnessed. So can the City of Yes include all these concerns as much as possible, at the same time other proposals that have to be there for it to work, we make a coalition and we do them together. Like, for example, office conversion. For example, city making sure that there's no predatory development going on, protecting the poor community and faith-based community, because it will happen once the market opens. And that's why my question, why is affordability requirement only in medium and high density area rather than throughout all areas, which will raise more affordable housing?
Great
John?
question. Just real quickly, why not have affordability requirements in lower density districts? A typical lot size in a low density district is about 2,500 square feet. At the FARs there, like you might be typical floor area, the zoning there, you might be able to get 3 or 4 units on a typical site. Unfortunately, buildings that small are unable generally to support affordability. And so if you put an affordability requirement on those types of buildings, they just don't get built at all. And then you haven't built any housing, you haven't addressed the housing shortage aspect of that. So we just have to be really careful about how we use our affordable requirements and make sure that it's feasible. Why not Vienna? Why not Austria? We definitely keep an eye on the housing market there. They also have a much lower population than they did 100 years
I'm
ago.
Sure, but the concept, the concept.
I mean, the conditions that make Vienna possible, unfortunately, just do not apply to a city like New York that is bursting at the seams and whose economic development and population growth have been pretty astounding over the last 100 years. So we're dealing with what we have now, which is basically all our public land is gone, and we're doing what we can to get new housing and affordable housing on privately owned, privately financed sites. But I hear you.
And so we have one more question, then we're going to go to next steps. But Rashida typed in, how about incentives for developers from unrepresented communities like MWBEs.
Definitely. Things like that, it's not legal to do it through the zoning, but HPD does have programs that support MBE development of affordable housing around the city. So when the city's spending money, those types of things are possible. When the city is merely regulating, setting the laws, what you can and can't do on a given site, it's much trickier there and generally not possible to do things like that. But we work with our sister agencies in order to support, those types of initiatives as well.
Right. Okay, so let's move into the next step. So we've all heard from you, and I've been impressed, and I've been impressed with who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and also the fact that this plan looks to really address the concerns of the folks in the faith community, as well as people who are concerned about low income and affordable housing. So what's our next step, John, if we want to be supportive or if we want to be more engaged?
So my email address is in the chat if you have any questions about particular sites. And then as far as next steps, if you want to support us politically, there are various ways to do that. I mean, Reverend Fultz Morrison witnessed at a community board meeting. That's one of the, to be honest, it was great to see that in the midst of a crowd of people. Everybody agrees that this is the worst thing ever and have no interest whatsoever on addressing some of the fundamental issues that we are trying to address through this fair housing plan. For somebody to stand up and just kind of attempt to reorient the conversation, get everybody to take a step back, to get an external perspective on what's going on. Things like that are valuable. Talking to council members can be extremely valuable when that time comes. And so I will absolutely, I hope nobody minds, after these 2 sessions are done, ask Mark for a list of folks and try to, reach out to see if you want to come to a city planning commission hearing and say something like, I'm from Riverdale. I know that the community board voted a resounding no. I have a different perspective on these issues and I support these aspects of the plan or something. Things like that can be incredibly powerful.
In terms of the timing, so you're saying in terms of the timing, there are different places where community can engage. One is the community board, another is with the planning commission.
City planning commission hearing will be on July 10th. And that is an opportunity to come out and testify. And then the city council hearing will be sometime later, probably September or something like that. But if I have your, email addresses, we can reach out and ask if you'd be interested in participating. If not, you can just delete or whatever. I won't spam you. I won't bug you too much on that. And then I'm always available for your questions, whether about aspects of the plan or questions about particular sites, things like that. I just, really love working with this community.
And Pietro is asking, what's the timing on the community board hearings and meetings?
They are in process right now. And I would say the last time I checked, I would say it was 1/3 or so voting yes or yes with conditions, and maybe 2/3 voting no or no. Believe it or not, no or no with conditions. Believe it or not, that's pretty good. And I think that that's better than we expected. It's just the nature of the beast that when you are doing big citywide things, often community boards are just reflexively concerned about what it might mean for their neighborhoods. But like you referenced, Mark, once we get to the borough president level, I think 4 out of 5 borough presidents have a broader perspective and are supportive. That helps build momentum going into the city planning commission and beyond. And so we're already having conversations with council members and hope that we can get everybody comfortable and do something that's good.
Great. Okay, Peter, did you want to say anything else, or anyone else have any final comments? But let me just clarify, John, for you and for everyone else. As Peter was saying, the group that is from our end, the group that's helping with pre-development, and what we do, just for everyone's information, is the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative and the Partnership for Faith-Based Affordable Housing, which Peter and I are, and Rashida are staff to, and we will look at a site and help you figure out if there's a possibility that affordable housing can be built on the site. And if we feel that there is a possibility, we'll check off some issues, including leadership at the congregation, financial stability, site control, et cetera, et cetera. And then we may invite, if we think there's a good shot that affordable housing could be built, we will invite you to apply for a pre-development grant from us of up to $30,000 to hire someone to put together an RFP or an RFQ. That means a request for proposals, a request for qualifications, basically a way to market your site with your plan to developers to say, this is what we want to do with our site. This is our mission. It fits with our mission. We have the capacity in terms of our land use and our zoning, and we want to find a developer who will help us do what we want to do. So that's what we do. And as Peter said, Enterprise works in similar ways, though different, and as does LISC. And so we're one of those three entities that tries to work with congregations early on in helping you to determine what you can do and then help you do it. As we know, the hardest money is the early money. How do you raise money for a plan if you don't have money if you don't have the plan? So we help you develop that plan that a developer can take a look at and say, I like that, I'm going to be a partner with you. So, but Peter, if you'd like to say anything else or anyone else before we close, and also let me just say, John, thank you so much for doing this. I continue to be so impressed with your commitment and your knowledge. And this is only the first, well, actually having another one next week, but we'll continue this conversation, obviously, and try to be as supportive as possible. So Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, so this whole conversation, I think, is highlighting for me the necessity for the city to draw more clear boundaries about what this does and what it does not do. Because what I think happens is that people bring out their frustrations around financing from the city, from developers, who's developing, and they think that all of their problems with that would be fixed by the city of Yes. And when the city of Yes doesn't fix those things, then they just oppose city of Yes. And so I think it's okay for, as the city talks to faith communities, to be really clear what this does do and what it does not do.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everyone. We finished on time, so I appreciate everyone's participation in that. We will be recording this. We'll be sharing it. We're doing another workshop on Tuesday at 10. John will be joining us at 10:30, so we may change the agenda around a little bit, but we expect to continue this conversation. And again, thank you all for joining us, and thank everyone who's had anything to do with making this what I think was a very successful conversation.
And thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Really appreciate
John.
it. Thanks,
Thanks,
Mark.
everybody.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great to see you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.